WBTV's Good Question is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network, powered by Ortho Carolina. Now offering video visits so you can take control of your orthopedic care from the comfort of your home. Schedule online at orthocarolina.com. Ortho Carolina, you improved.
When you think allergies, you probably think a cough or a sneeze, tall grass, or a food you can't eat. But what about allergic reactions tied to the coronavirus vaccines? We're listening to your questions.
I want to know what is in that vaccine.
And taking them to an expert.
Again, fantastic question.
This is WBTV's Good Question. Hello and welcome to the Good Question podcast. I'm WBTV anchor Alex Giles, alongside Jamie Bull, anchor of WBTV and anchor of WBTV's On Your Side Tonight program, and Jess Dyer, producer of WBTV's On Your Side Tonight program. I want to first start off by just getting into what the Good Question podcast is and what the Good Question concept is. It was really born out of a program that we've had on WBTV for a few years now called On Your Side Tonight with Jamie Bull. And Jamie, do you want to explain what Good Question is and how it's kind of taken off?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we were thinking to ourselves as we were putting this show together, we were just trying to come up with different kinds of ideas, different concepts that would make us look a little different than the other newscasts, that we had on the air at the time, because, obviously you're on from 4, 5, 5:30, 6 o'clock. There's a 7 o'clock newscast. So we were just trying to find different ways of doing things, getting different concepts, different stories on the air that otherwise might be, never find the light of day. And one of the things we were just kind of kicking around was, how many times you've been in a conversation and somebody, raises a point and you're like, I don't know, good question. And we thought, you know what, that's a great idea for a segment, because it's everyday conversation. You might be driving by a new tower that's going up somewhere in Charlotte. You wonder what's going to go in there. Good question. What's the history behind, that street name in Charlotte? Good question. Obviously, though, that has kind of morphed a little bit here of late because of the news that's dominated the world, and that is the pandemic. And Jess, that's obviously something that we have just been inundated with viewers getting, questions about the vaccine and COVID, et cetera.
Yeah, I literally have a spreadsheet of questions that I keep track of, because since the pandemic started, it really did just morph into all of these questions about COVID. And then as the pandemic has changed over time, the questions have shifted to, the vaccine, things I can do to be safe, when can I get vaccinated, but also questions about the science of the vaccine. It's just, our inbox is inundated with questions. So it felt like we could do a lot more with it. We usually do one question a night. We played around with doing a couple of questions on Friday nights on Your Side Tonight, but there's just so much. And a lot of times we get the same question a lot. So it's clear that a lot of people are wondering the same thing. So how can we address those bigger questions?
Yeah, the hope here is that a lot of people will listen to the Good Question podcast, and maybe we can touch on some of the questions that we can expand on that you guys already touched on and On Your Side Tonight, or answer new questions for some people, depending on what they're asking about. And obviously, as you guys mentioned, the big topic, obviously the pandemic. And vaccine is what we hear about every day. And we're hoping that we can kind of answer some more questions about the vaccine, because we know a lot of people still have a lot of concerns about it. Right, Jamie?
Yeah, absolutely. And rightfully so. I mean, we're doing something, in history that's never been done before, a pandemic that started a year ago to have vaccine available, and what really was about 9 months was incredible. And, the whole thing was called Operation Warp Speed, right? That was sort of the program behind all of this. So it's going to raise questions. People are going to be worried, and rightfully so, probably on some level. We've obviously been told by the experts, there's no need to worry, that this is safe. We know it's effective. We've seen that already through the trials. But, anytime something happens fast, and people might be reluctant at first, and they're going to have a lot of questions about side effects and what might mean long term. How does it actually work in my body? What's it doing? All these things are just natural. And especially with the speed of things, I think it's perfectly reasonable that people would have questions. And so we're happy to answer them every night and hopefully provide some of that information to encourage people to understand that it is safe, it is effective, and this is our way out, of this pandemic once and for all.
There's light at the end of the tunnel. So that brings us to our first couple of questions that we're hoping to get to in this first episode, about allergic reactions, about the vaccine, about what goes into the different vaccines, and how people can feel comfortable getting these vaccines. So we're going to be talking to a couple different folks here, and hopefully we can answer some questions. Each week, we are going to bring in an expert to help us answer some of these good questions. And today, we're going to bring in Dr. Edwin Kim from UNC. He's the medical director of the UNC Allergy and Immunology Clinic. Dr. Kim, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. First off, tell us a little bit about what you specialize in and the work you do at UNC.
Yeah, so I'm one of the allergy and immunology faculty here at UNC, and we see and treat patients with all kinds of allergies, from the basic seasonal runny nose stuff all the way down to anaphylaxis from medications and drugs as well, or medications and foods as well.
Wow. I'm going to start pretty basic here. Tell us what happens when your body has an allergic reaction. We hear all the time about people having, a peanut butter allergy, or they can't, eat certain foods. What is that happening in your body when you have an allergic reaction?
That's a great question. And the way I would describe it is what happens with allergies is your body's normal protective immune response gets exaggerated. It's overblown to something that really shouldn't be a bother at all. I mean, why should your body be upset at being exposed to peanut? But in some patients, their immune system doesn't kind of regulate itself, and it allows itself to not only react, but overreact to things that should be otherwise completely harmless.
We've heard a lot of people asking questions about allergic reactions tied to the coronavirus vaccines these days. How common have allergic reactions been when it comes to the vaccine?
That's a fantastic question, and something that, of course, we've been dealing with on an almost daily basis since the rollout of these vaccines in late December. The good news, I would say, is that true allergic and anaphylactic, so the really scary allergic reactions to these COVID vaccines has thankfully been very, very rare.
Good.
But I think what has really complicated things is there are lots of non-anaphylactic side effects that patients are having. And so one of our jobs has been trying to tease out which ones are the scary, kind of life-threatening kinds of reactions versus the really uncomfortable and annoying types of reactions.
Wow. Dr. Kim, I want to get to some of the questions that we got from some of our viewers and run them by you and see if you might be able to help us get some answers to these folks. How does that sound?
Absolutely, yes.
This question comes from Byron, and he asks, if I'm allergic to bee stings, should I not get the vaccine for the coronavirus?
Yeah, so this is a common scenario that's been asked of us as well. So bee stings and yellow jackets and all these stinging insects can cause anaphylaxis in some patients, and they come to us to get allergy shots to try to help that. But knowing that these patients have experienced anaphylaxis, they've wondered, are they at higher risk? And thankfully, what we know and what the CDC has also recommended is these patients can get the vaccine just like everybody else in the general public and can be safe from it. To be extra safe, what we have recommended is these patients stay in the clinic for a little bit longer, for 30 minutes after getting that vaccine, to be absolutely sure that nothing is going to happen. But otherwise, they can get it just like anybody else can.
I know there's a lot of research being done right now about vaccines in general. Have folks determined which allergies are okay to still get the vaccine with? Are there some that you might be a little bit more at risk with, depending on what the allergy is, and you'd want to be a little bit more careful about getting the vaccine?
Again, fantastic question. And at this point, really the only patients that we are a little bit extra concerned about are going to be ones who've had problems with vaccines before in the past, especially, of course, ones that may have had a reaction to the first dose of either of the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccines. Those are the patients that I think we're keeping a close eye on. But for all other types of allergies, whether it's going to be anaphylactic food allergy, the bee sting allergy we talked about, oral medications. Some people are allergic to, say, penicillin or amoxicillin. Your seasonal allergies, all of those other patients, we do feel like can very safely get these vaccines, just like the general public. Possibly, again, with this slightly longer observation period, but again, no other restrictions necessary.
But if you're someone who has a doctor who has told you in the past to be hesitant about certain vaccines, you'd want to use that same caution with these vaccines.
That's right. So for those patients, I think what I want to be clear about is by no means are we going to say these patients cannot get the vaccine.
Right.
In most cases, they probably can get the vaccine. But what we think those patients should do is make sure they are talking to their doctor and possibly their allergist to just make sure what exactly has happened in the past and then what is their true risk moving forward. This does give me the chance, though, to really just bring out this point that, again, the likelihood of reactions to these vaccines, even in these people who've had vaccine reactions, is going to be very small. And unfortunately, compared to the number of people who are getting corona and even obviously having the terrible fatal outcomes, it's, again, for most people, there's going to be no comparison in this risk and benefit.
Important to break that down. Doctor, this next question comes from Wilhelmina. She's one of our WBTV viewers, and she asks, if I'm allergic to the flu vaccine, should I not get the COVID vaccine? And you already touched on this to an extent.
Exactly. So I think that's the type of patient where we want to talk to them. So just make sure, what has happened in the past for the flu vaccine? Is there some identifiable reason for that we can sort of use to gauge sort of what the risk with the COVID vaccine would be? But in all likelihood, she is one that will be able to get this COVID vaccine under some longer observation to make sure that we can keep her safe.
This is one I had thought of. Are there specific times when people probably shouldn't be getting the COVID vaccine, even if there's someone who would normally be able to get it, whether it be, they just took another shot or had some sort of medical treatment where a doctor would say, you should get this, but maybe not right now?
These are just outstanding questions that are coming up. And so this is one where I'm going to answer it in two ways. The first way I'm going to say is, unfortunately, we know how difficult it is to get the vaccine right now. So I'm going to say, if you can get a chance for an appointment, you should get it. So that's sort of the first answer. But really speaking to your question, there really aren't many scenarios I could think of. If you're actively ill, if you've got fever, those are situations where you're just not going to feel up to it. Your immune system may not be in the best place. Plus, maybe you have COVID, so you could be exposing people in the vaccine clinics. So those folks, I think, should wait and give it another week or two and be fully better from whatever may be ailing them at that time. But outside of that, there really isn't any scenarios I can think of that would say you should pause and not get that vaccine.
Some great information and great answers to some good questions from a lot of our viewers. These questions that we've already touched on lead to another good question. We're going to hear from a longtime WBTV viewer what her question is. You might have the same one. We're going to get to it in just a moment after a quick break.
At Ortho Carolina, my personalized orthopedic care begins with the click of a mouse because online scheduling saves me time. Ortho Carolina, my care, my way.
Schedule your appointment today at orthocarolina.com.
Staying informed is hard. There's so much information, it's hard to find content that speaks right to you. What if there was one place where you could find news, entertainment, sports, music, and comedy created in and all about the place you call home?
This is the Charlotte Newsmakers Podcast.
The Charlotte Podcast.
Welcome to Do Good Charlotte.
Welcome to the Comedy Zone Podcast.
The Queen City Podcast Network. Powered by Ortho Carolina at queencitypodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome back to Good Question. We've been talking about allergies, allergic reactions with the COVID vaccine. We have Dr. Edwin Kim from UNC here with us, and he's been answering some of these questions. We had one viewer who had another good question about the vaccine. I spoke to her on the phone. Take a listen.
Suzanne, first things first, tell me where in the area you live and how long have you been watching WBTV?
I live in the Hickory area, and I have been watching WBTV 30 plus years. Yes, I don't watch any other news broadcast.
Well, I appreciate you watching us. That's awesome. What was the question that you specifically had, Suzanne?
I was wanting to find out exactly what is in the vaccine. I'm really concerned about all three of them, and I want to know what is in that vaccine before I get that. I want to know what's going in my body. I'm really concerned with that, especially with the side effects.
Okay, we want to get back to Dr. Kim from UNC now and see if we can address some of those concerns from Suzanne. Dr. Kim, how are vaccines made? How are the ingredients selected when this process is happening?
Again, really good question here. And they first start by trying to figure out, is there some place on the virus or whatever we're trying to protect against that is sort of universal, that by knocking out that one place, you can really prevent all infection, regardless of whether the virus might be ever so slightly different or some of these variants you think about. And so that's sort of the first thing that happens in the lab. And so that's where a lot of folks may have heard of this concept of this spike protein. So we do know that the virus needs this special spike protein to be able to infect and get into our cells. And so that's where all these different vaccines that are in development, they may be different forms of vaccine, but they're all targeting the same thing. And now the two vaccines that have been available to this point, the Pfizer and Moderna, they are a different type of vaccine. Listeners may have heard of this concept of mRNA. And I think what's important for patients to understand with this is a way of actually exposing our bodies to this spike protein without actually giving any kind of virus or anything that can infect us, which is important because, again, nobody wants to get sick from the vaccine. No one wants to get the actual COVID from it. And so what it does is it actually gives you that genetic material for your own body to make a version of the spike protein. Then your immune system sees it and says, hey, I don't like this. And that's where you start to make those antibodies to that spike protein itself. And the thought is going to be then you've got this entire supply of protection in your body. So when you are actually exposed to COVID itself, your body is ready. It's already seen it. It knows what it looks like, and it can fight it off the chance.
We've all seen the pictures and some of the video of the syringe, going into the arms of people who are getting the COVID vaccine. What is the ingredient in the vaccine? What are we putting into ourselves? And I know you kind of touched on this to an extent.
Yep. So again, the Pfizer and the Moderna ones are this mRNA, this genetic material for only that specific part. It is actually combined with something called PEG, though, polyethylene glycol. And this is something that has been in the news a lot. The reason it's in the news is that this is something unique to these vaccines. Other vaccines typically have not had this component. And so there's been some question about, well, some of these few people who have had allergic reactions, could it be because there is this new thing that's in there? I will clarify that it's not well proven that this is the reason that some of these people have had anaphylaxis, but because it is a component, it's something that's very much on people's mind, and we're trying to study to truly understand, is this sort of a cause of that? Outside of that, though, there really isn't much else. They're just, again, some of these lipids, these versions of fats and things that just are in there to keep the vaccine stable. But there's not, other mysterious ingredients in there that, should be messing with our immune systems. I mean, there's even some concerns about things like microchips and all sorts of other stuff. And thankfully, again, nothing at all like that. This is strictly, again, science that's working here, the genetic material for your body to actually create its own version so that you can make your own protection.
The government is not trying to track you, correct?
Wait, right.
What is the difference between the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines? I feel like people are wondering, should I get one versus the other when it comes to Moderna or Pfizer? Does it matter which, clinic I sign up for, depending on which vaccine they're administering? What is the difference between those two?
So both of them are very, very, very similar. Again, they're both using this mRNA technique. And outside of that, there's very little difference in there. And actually, in the eyes of the CDC, with respect to kind of how it works and the side effects, they're actually considered to be the same. When you put the components of what's in them side by side, more or less, they look exactly the same. One small difference is going to be Moderna. They recommend 28 days between the vaccines versus Pfizer, where it's 21 days. And the side effect profile as far as swelling of the arm and stuff like that, those numbers may be ever so slightly different. But the number to me that counts is how well does it work? And both of them have met this really high bar of 95% protection, which is outstanding.
We've heard now that Johnson & Johnson has their vaccine, and it's a little different than Moderna and Pfizer. Correct me if I'm wrong. What does that mean for people with allergies?
Well, first of all, I will say from the clinical trials, it was wonderful news that I saw that only one case of allergic reaction or anaphylaxis reported. And if I remember, I think it's out of 44,000 or so patients.
Wow.
So, I mean, again, if you just do the math on that, that is a very, very small number. So sounds to be extremely safe from an allergy point of view. There's only one shot when it comes to that as well. So only one chance to have an allergic reaction as well. So I think another reason why that could be a really good option. It does not have that PEG product. Now, again, keep in mind, we don't know that PEG is the problem for the Moderna or Pfizer ones, but it doesn't have that for patients who may have some concerns about that. But outside of that, again, I think it's just another option. And to me, really the way I see this is just more supply. Again, we have so many people out there who need the vaccine, who want the vaccine and can't get it. And so to have one more on the market that can just get to more people, I think is just going to be critically important if we're going to beat this thing.
What do you think, Dr. Kim, when you hear about vaccine hesitancy from some people? Do you understand those concerns?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to think that way with, what's been going on in this country over the last year. I think there's just been a lot of confusing information that's out there. And for the majority of people, I don't think there's any ill will at all. I think it's just been trying to figure out what is real and what is not real and try to, make sense of all of that for themselves. I think the critical thing here is to now try to do our best to get the right information out there and understand that this really is going to be what is needed for us to get past COVID, to really try to even start thinking about normal. A lot of us are thinking about how do we get our kids back in school? How do we do our summer vacations, summer camps, whatever else? None of that stuff happens until we get past Corona. And really at this point, the only thing that I see that's going to help us get there are going to be these vaccines.
Before I let you go, what would be your advice for anyone who has a concern about an allergic reaction to the vaccine? They're just worried that once they get the shot, something bad's going to happen.
Well, I think twofold there. Number one is going to be to reach out to their doctors, to reach out to me, reach out to UNC Allergy, reach out to allergists, wherever you may be, to try to ask those questions. Because, again, these are not questions that are just that, everybody's got them. So I think number one, make sure you have the right information. And then number two, really think about what we're comparing here. So we are comparing COVID, which is now 500,000 people have died from this. I mean, it's just an outrageously huge number. And understanding that versus the small number of people who've had allergic reaction. And keep in mind with these allergic reactions, even anaphylaxis, every single one of them, we've been able to treat them and get them back to normal. And so anaphylaxis is something, yes, it's scary, but it is something we know how to treat. And if we do it right, we can keep people safe.
Great information. Dr. Edwin Kim, Medical Director of the UNC Allergy and Immunology Clinic. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks to all of you for listening to WBTV's Good Question, a podcast from On Your Side Tonight. If you have a good question, email goodquestion@WBTV.com or use the hashtag OYSTonight on Twitter. Watch On Your Side Tonight with Jamie Bowl live on weeknights at 7:30 on WBTV. If you can't make it to the TV at 7:30, you can watch WBTV anytime on Roku, Amazon Fire, or Apple TV. WBTV's Good Question is a product of WBTV in cooperation with Queen City Podcast Network and Balto Creative Media. From WBTV, Good Question is produced by Jess Dyer. Special thanks to Jamie Bowl. From the Queen City Podcast Network, Good Question is produced by Brian Baltashevitz, production manager Sarah Pollock, and post-production supervisor Jeremy Davis. It is recorded at the Queen City Podcast Network studios at Advent Co-working in Charlotte, North Carolina.